The prairie stretched out in endless silence, broken only by the slow creak of Elias Carter's windmill and the restless shifting of his old sorrel horse in the corral. The sun was just climbing over the horizon, spilling gold across the dry earth, painting long shadows against the empty land. Elias sat on his porch, hat pulled low, pipe resting between his fingers. He had waited years in this silence, years of dust, sweat, and memories that never stopped gnawing. Today, the stagecoach was due. Today, he would no longer be alone. His boots tapped restlessly against the boards, betraying the nerves he would never admit. A soldier once, a rancher now, he had faced bullets, fire, and fever, but the thought of meeting a woman who would be his bride made his chest tighten like a green boy's. He had written letters, carefully phrased and painfully honest, though he knew words could only do so much. He needed someone beside him, someone to answer the long nights when the silence pressed too hard. He had imagined her voice, her laughter, a warmth filling the cold corners of this house. Dust rose on the horizon. The coach rattled closer, each wheel squeaking as if to mock his pounding heartbeat. Elias stood, brushing down his vest, tugging the brim of his hat. His mouth was dry. The driver cracked the reins, the horses slowed, and the stage ground to a halt before his gate. The door opened with a metallic creak. Out stepped not the fair-haired woman he had imagined, not the English-speaking bride promised by the agency. Instead, a slight figure in a silk tunic embroidered with faded flowers, black hair pulled tight into a bun, eyes dark and cautious. Elias froze, confusion flooding him. The woman lowered her gaze, bowing slightly, a motion delicate yet deliberate. She murmured something he couldn't understand, a language sharp and melodic, utterly foreign to his ears. He blinked, his heart still hammering. "You're my wife," he muttered, half to himself. She tilted her head, as though sensing the question but unable to reach its meaning. The driver shrugged, uninterested. "This the bride they sent, Carter. My job's done." With a snap of the reins, the coach rumbled away, leaving Elias staring at the stranger on his land. The silence stretched. He cleared his throat, gesturing toward the house. "Come on then." She followed, cautious but upright, her movements graceful even in the dust of the yard. Inside, he set bread and beans on the table. She produced a small bundle from her satchel, polished wooden chopsticks, a keepsake from a life across the sea. She tried to eat quietly, though he caught her watching him out of the corner of her eye. He offered her a fork, grumbling under his breath. She took it politely, though clearly unsure. They ate in uneasy silence, the air thick with misunderstanding. Afterward, he tried speaking slowly, as though volume or patience might bridge the canyon between them. "Elias," he said, tapping his chest. "Elias Carter." She hesitated, then touched her own chest lightly. "My Lynn." Her voice was soft, yet it carried a firmness that surprised him. They repeated each other's names, awkward and halting, but it was a start. Still, frustration simmered beneath his calm exterior. Letters had promised him a companion who could share his thoughts, not someone locked behind an unbreakable wall of language. He muttered curses as he worked the corral that evening, feeling her eyes on him from the porch. What in God's name was he supposed to do with this? The first trip into town made matters worse. Whispers followed them down the boardwalk, sharp laughter biting at his back. A pair of ranch hands tipped their hats mockingly. One man, reeking of whiskey, staggered into their path. "Couldn't find yourself a woman who speaks your tongue, Carter." The insult landed like a slap. Before My Lynn could flinch, Elias's fist struck, the drunk crumpling into the dirt. Another lunged, and Elias met him with a hard swing, knuckles cracking. They tumbled into the street, fists and boots flying. Dust rose, curses rang out. When the fight ended, Elias stood bruised, bleeding, but unbowed. The townsfolk looked away, muttering. He turned to My Lynn, chest heaving, and growled, "Welcome to America. We fight first, talk later." She blinked at him, lips twitching just enough to suggest the shadow of a smile. Somehow, that small curve of her mouth eased the sting of the jeers. Back at the ranch, the night settled heavy and quiet. Elias sat on the porch, pipe glowing faintly in the dark. From inside came a murmur, low and melodic. He leaned closer, realizing My Lynn was speaking, not to him, but to something greater, her words flowing in her native tongue. It was prayer, or perhaps memory. He could not understand, but the sound held a weight that pierced him deeper than silence ever had. She, too, carried ghosts. She, too, was a stranger stranded in a hostile land. For the first time since she had arrived, Elias felt shame for his anger. She hadn't chosen this any more than he had chosen his scars. He rose, ready to retreat inside, when the night shattered. Gunshots cracked in the distance, sharp and unmistakable. He froze, every instinct honed from years of soldiering flaring alive. He scanned the horizon, dust moving where no dust should, shadows shifting with the rhythm of hooves. Bandits, and too close. He reached for his revolver, the cold metal heavy in his palm. Loneliness had been his burden once, a weight he had learned to carry. But now, there was someone else in his house. Someone he hadn't asked for, hadn't wanted, but who was now his responsibility. He whispered into the darkness, more to himself than anyone else, loneliness was one thing. But now I've got someone to protect. The night pressed in, the threat drawing nearer, and Elias Carter knew his life had just changed forever. The first streaks of dusk bled across the horizon, staining the sky in bruised shades of violet. Elias had not moved from the porch since hearing the shots the night before, his rifle now resting against his leg like an extension of his arm. The land seemed to breathe uneasily around him, the usual chorus of coyotes and night birds replaced with silence. My Lin lingered near the doorway, watching him, her hands clasped tight as if in prayer. Though she spoke no word he could understand, the fear in her eyes was as plain as scripture. When the riders came, they came hard. Hooves drummed against the hardpan, raising plumes of dust that swallowed the horizon. Elias's muscles tightened, his mind leaping back to fields littered with cannon smoke and screams. He had promised himself never again to stand waiting for death to gallop his way, yet here it was, inevitable as the setting sun. He barked a wordless order at My Lin, gesturing toward the house. She obeyed, vanishing inside, though her shadow hovered near the window. The bandits struck like wolves, circling the corral, firing wild shots meant to rattle more than kill. Elias dropped behind a trough, rifle snug against his shoulder. He fired, the crack splitting the evening, one rider tumbling lifeless from the saddle. The others shouted, spurred their mounts, and closed in. Bullets hissed past his ear, splinters flew from the barn wall. He gritted his teeth, answering with shot after shot, his movements sharp, precise, honed by years of violence he'd sworn to leave behind. Through the chaos, a scream pierced the din, high, fierce, not his. My Lin. Elias's head whipped around. She stood just outside the door, a kettle in her hands. As a bandit lunged toward her, she hurled the boiling water full into his face. His howl split the night as he reeled back, skin blistering. Elias wasted no breath, his bullet finished the job. For a heartbeat, their eyes met across the firelit yard, hers wide with fear and defiance, his stunned by the realization that she was not a fragile passenger to be sheltered. She was fighting beside him. The attack broke with as much suddenness as it began. The surviving bandits, shocked by their losses, pulled back into the gathering dark. Elias stood panting, sweat streaking the dust on his face, his hands trembling despite the gun still steady in his grip. My Lin moved toward him slowly, a cut running across her palm, blood glistening in the lamplight. Without thinking, he caught her hand, wrapping it clumsily in his kerchief. Her gaze softened, and though neither could speak, the silence between them shifted from distance to recognition. Later, inside, the lamplight cast their shadows long against the wooden walls. Elias sat at the table, mending her wound with calloused care. He muttered softly, his voice almost tender, "You saved my hide out there." She tilted her head, searching his face as if trying to divine the meaning. Her lips moved uncertainly, forming the words with effort. "Thank you." The accent was heavy, the syllables fractured, but the intent clear. Elias chuckled, the sound rough from disuse. Encouraged, she tried another phrase, broken, halting, "You, brave." He laughed again, shaking his head. "Lord, you've got the wrong man." Then, almost mischievously, he attempted her tongue, fumbling through sounds he'd overheard. What came out was a tangle of noise so absurd that My Lin's laughter burst free, light and musical, filling the cabin in a way no words ever had. For the first time in years, Elias laughed with her, the sound carrying something dangerously close to hope. As the days crawled forward, they found a rhythm forged in necessity. Elias worked the herd while My Lin tended the home, yet she proved far more than a housekeeper. She learned the weight of the rifle, practiced with quiet determination, her aim steadier each evening. At the same time, she pressed him with gestures, with repeated words, teaching him fragments of her language while struggling to master his. Their conversations remained clumsy, but meaning began to seep through the cracks. Each shared glance, each awkward smile built a bridge plank by plank. One evening, after a supper eaten in weary silence, My Lin lifted her hands, shaping her story in air and scattered words. She spoke of hunger in her village, of men who promised work across the sea, of betrayal and chains. Her voice quavered, yet her eyes burned steady, daring him to look away. Elias did not. He listened, jaw tight, heart heavy. He had his own scars, battles, and graves that haunted him, but her courage in revealing her stirred something deeper than pity. It was kinship. It was recognition. The reprieve could not last. The gang returned, stronger and angrier, their leader riding at the front with a sneer carved deep into his face. This time they came with fire, torches flaring as they thundered toward the ranch. Elias shoved my Lynn toward cover, but she shook her head fiercely, seizing a lantern from the porch. Together they braced for the storm. Gunfire shattered the night. Elias moved with grim precision, his revolver spitting fire as he ducked behind the wagon. Bullets tore through planks, heat searing his arm as one grazed him. Still he stood, unyielding. The bandits pressed closer, their laughter cruel, certain of victory. But then my Lynn, fearless and unflinching, hurled the lantern into the barricade of hay bales Elias had stacked earlier. Flames roared upward, a wall of fire cutting the raiders off from their advance. Horses shrieked, rearing back in panic. The leader cursed, raising his pistol, and Elias answered with steel. The standoff lasted no more than a heartbeat. His shot struck true, the man collapsing with a guttural cry. Panic rippled through the gang, their formation broke, riders scattering into the dark. Soon the yard was littered only with smoke, silence, and the acrid stench of burned hay. Elias lowered his weapon slowly, chest heaving. The firelight painted my Lynn's face in bronze and shadow, her hair wild, her eyes unyielding. She stood like a survivor of battle, not a stranger, not a burden, but an equal. He stepped closer, every word weighted with a truth he had denied himself too long. "You're home now. If you'll stay." Her breath caught, eyes shimmering with something unspoken. She nodded once, simple and sure. No words were needed. The night settled again, though it no longer felt empty. The wind carried the smell of ash, the echo of gunfire fading into memory. Elias glanced at the horizon, at the darkness pressing close, and knew danger would always linger. But for the first time, he did not dread it. Together they had stood, and together they would face whatever came next. In the quiet that followed, his voice carried softly into the night, meant as much for the unseen listener as for himself. "The West don't give you what you want. It gives you what you can fight to keep." He looked at my Lynn, her gaze steady, and almost smiled. "And I reckon we'll fight just fine." The story did not end there, it could not. The frontier stretched on, merciless and uncertain, yet within it now lay the fragile beginnings of something worth defending. Elias Carter, once alone, had found not only a companion but a reason to endure. The road ahead promised blood, hardship, and storms, but also laughter, firelight, and the possibility of love where neither had expected to find it. And that, in the lawless sweep of the West, was its own kind of miracle.